Ryan wrote a great article about Kaden Saunders the other day, and Kaden talked about some of the growing pains that he had in his first year. For the class of 22 freshmen who did not have an on-field impact during the season, who can you tell has been making some early progress or impact through the February workouts?
Well, he ruined the punchline by putting Kaleb Artis in the parentheses there. He obviously read our piece last week about how Artis is progressing, and that's an interesting one to me because you have such a big need. Maybe not this year at defensive tackle because you have bodies, you have athletes there, but moving forward, I think Kaleb Artis is an important piece in there. We focus so much on Zane Durant from that class of 2022 coming in playing right away. Artis, the exact opposite, came in a little banged up. It was kind of on and off there for a while, but he seemed to make some strides. And when I reached out to people last week, who's kind of surprised so far, Kaleb Artis was one of the guys that popped up that, would be a surprise to most people because he hasn't played. I think he got in one or two games, but he hasn't been a fixture. He hasn't been a guy that we thought was on the verge of breaking through or anything like that. But 6'4", 315, you look at that room and what they're missing is a big guy like PJ that was in there at 325 pounds. So can he be that guy right away? I tend to lean no at this point for 2023, but it's encouraging for 2024 and beyond that you can find a guy that can fill that role.
Yeah. And I'll, you go with who you wrote and I'll go with who I wrote, which is Keon Wylie, just as a guy who probably did not get a ton of attention last year through the course of the season, but ended up being named one of the co-developmental team defensive players of the year with Jake Wilson. Here's a guy who could have helped probably and would have helped if the situation demanded it, but it didn't. And so, they were able to preserve his red shirt last year, and yet he was still able to get some experience there in November, and also really had, I think, as you may have mentioned, sort of a radical body transformation. He's a guy who put on some weight through his first year in the program.
Yeah, he's at 223 right now, self-reported. He says he can play around 225. That to me tells me that Will is probably a better fit than Mike, where he played this year. And plus, you've got Tamir Robinson coming in. Of course, you've got guys coming in at every spot in that freshman class. But he's a good football player, always has been a good football player. They used him off the edge at Imhotep, and that was a transition that he had to make to play in traffic, to play Mike. But it seemed like he came on at the end of the year and did some nice things, at least on the developmental squad. I still think he's got to get bigger. He's going to get lost in some of that traffic playing at 223, but he is still just on the back end of his freshman year. So Wylie's interesting. I think he's a guy that you look to fill some of those special teams lanes in 2023. We'll see what happens. And I think the Will depth chart sets up a little bit better. I mean, you've got obviously a position battle in front of you at Mike with Tyler Elston and Kobe King, but then you've got Abdul Carter at the Will and really not many other people there. Curtis Jacobs can float and play both. Don DeLuca could probably play both, but that's just from a pen and paper standpoint, that's probably the quickest route to the field. Looking at these other redshirt freshmen, you mentioned Kaden Saunders, or Ryan wrote about Kaden Saunders. Very intrigued to see how he responds in the next year. It wasn't what he thought it was, and that's something that's hard for some people to process, for some freshmen to process, especially ones as talented as Saunders, guys that come in All-American, top 100 guys, and it just doesn't click right off the bat. And that's humbling for some guys. So I'm interested to see which direction it goes in there. Going down the list here, Mehki Flowers and Anthony Ivy, a couple of guys that have been lumped together as Central Pennsylvania guys that, did some nice things here and there throughout their redshirt freshman year. Of course, Christian Driver switching to receiver. The guy that I would circle just going down further down the list, and we've talked about him a bunch, so it's not really a surprise, but Vega Ione, 6'4", 336, and just huge. I know you ran into Vega a couple of weeks ago, and I don't think it was, I wouldn't suggest running into a guy that big, especially for a guy like you. But he's gonna compete. There's spots to get reps there in the spring, and he's going to, out of this entire group, probably see the most reps out of anybody at his position group.
Yeah, it's such an interesting class, just given the fact that there were so many who did play, right? Who had as much of an impact as they did.